Hi guys, Creative Katie Karen Burchill here. Welcome to an art journal tutorial. Today we are using some rice papers from Stamperia as well as TCW stencils to create this beautifully textured vintage page. The rice paper I'm using is from Stamperia. It's called Dreamer and you can get it at ninniesnapkins.com. So to start off, I am using champagne gold modeling paste from the Crafter's Workshop with this wheat stalks stencil. And I'm just applying this onto tissue paper. Now this is going to allow me to play with the image that I'm creating with the modeling paste and set up the composition that I want on my page. It's a great do ahead, build your stash, because you can get out your stencils, use the modding paste, clean up, and it's dry. And for this, you need to let this dry naturally on its own. So while that's drying, I am taking that rice paper and I am ripping it up into and changing the composition for how I want it. Now they're beautiful and it's really hard to take these rice papers and rip them up. But for me, with the stencils and with rice papers or napkins, until I cut them out of the hole, it seems to block my creative process. So once I cut them up, I'm able to move them around on my page and somehow the creative process starts. So don't be afraid. This rice paper I actually cut up a long time ago and then inspiration didn't hit. So once I have the basic idea of where I want this rice paper to go, I'm just marking off that area because my plan is to put some texture onto the background. And I don't want a lot of that texture underneath the rice paper. So here I'm using the Crafter's Workshop Light and Fluffy Modeling Paste with this damask stencil. It's a 12-inch stencil. And I'm adding it. Remember, I'm going for that vintage, old wallpaper look. So I want this texture in here. Now, depending if I put gesso through the stencil, thick gesso, or modeling paste, light and fluffy, the regular modeling paste, I'm going to get a slightly different effect. Now, when you put modeling paste or gesso through the stencil, you do need to take the time to clean it off. I just wipe off the excess and then I use my Murphy's oil soap. Alternatively, you can throw that into a tub of water and let it so it doesn't get hard on your stencil and wreck your stencil. So now I am placing all the elements on the page. I'm finalizing it. Now I did do some stamping on that rice paper. You'll see where that goes. Now I'm getting rid of the excess tissue paper on here and I thought, oh, I could just rip it out. But that got a little bit tedious and I like to get as much of this tissue paper out. It's going to go basically translucent and my background's going to be fairly light, so it wouldn't have been too big of a problem. But I found that if I'm using my liner brush and water, I am water cutting this. Now, if you've done water cutting on napkins, here's what I found. With the tissue paper, I needed a little bit more water. It's thicker, it's sturdier than napkin. So you need a little bit more water. But the liner brush I have found to be the all-time best way of doing it. And I'm getting as much out as I feel necessary. If it's a light background, you can get away with a lot more. If it's a darker background, you want to remove as much of that because it's going to be frosty and you may be able to see it. That being said, do you have to go as excessive as what I'm doing here? Maybe not. But as you can see, it's quite easy to do. Now remember, this is sped up, so I'm not really going as fast as what you're seeing. That kind of gives a distorted sense. So now that I have all my elements and the modeling paste is dry, I am taking this foliage cube from Stamperia, and I'll put the links to this and other products in the description box below if you want to go check them out. If you shop through my Amazon links, I do get a commission, just to be perfectly transparent on that. This is kind of a little bit of foliage, and it's matching what's on the rice paper. And that element you do see later on. Now I'm taking some raw umber, unbleached titanium, and gesso, and I'm going to colorize it. And I'm taking the color, as you saw me, from the rice paper. That's in the rice paper. And so be it a napkin or a rice paper, that's where you can take your color sense from. And then just take your paints and mix them. Adding gesso in there just seems to be the perfect addition to getting those colors right. Play with it and see what you can do. It's amazing what you can get by color mixing. You don't need to have every color that exists. So remember, I'm going for that old wallpaper look. A little bit of browns, a little bit of whites, a little bit of that unbleached titanium. And I'm putting that in place. So I'm going to have the wheat stalks coming out from the blue poppies. And the reason I chose the gold for the wheat stalks is because there's that gold color in the middle of those poppies. And I want to bring that color into other areas. So now I'm using my Prussian blue and gesso, and I'm bringing that blue into that wallpaper. And I'm putting things where they are because I don't want to put a whole lot. I want some of that blue behind the gold of the wheat because I'm thinking that that's going to give a little bit more contrast than the unbleached titanium and brown. So I'm being a little bit strategic here about where I'm putting colors. And I'm adding and I'm deleting just till it looks right to me. And it's very instinctual, I guess, but you got to trust what looks good to you. So now that the background, the basic layer of color is there, I'm gluing down the rice paper and the tissue paper embellishments that I created with modeling paste with my liquid matte medium from Liquitex. I love this for decoupaging. The rice paper goes mostly translucent. You can still see some of that blue and brown peeking through. I've also found that with the tissue paper, if you spritz it with a little bit of water and then use a lot of the matte medium, the fluid, it really goes quite translucent, transparent, where you're not going to see that it was, in fact, tissue paper. Tissue paper typically will stand up better to wet than napkin, as does rice paper. So I'm just putting more matte medium underneath, but I'm keeping it in the place. And the brush that I'm using isn't my usual gluing brush because that's all gunked up and it's rather hard in places. I want to use a brush that is softer because I don't want to rip the rice paper, the tissue paper, the napkin. Now, when you put the matte medium on it, when you glue it down, I find that the rice paper, the colors do get a little brighter. Now again, if my background was really dark, that would affect what I had. So I might have painted that part out beforehand. Now I didn't like the stamping on there. That corner got a very dark. Any of the stamping with the script that I put, I cut that part of the video out. I'm coming back in with my basic paints, the unbleached titanium, my gesso in the blue, and covering up those areas. I'm editing now. Something I tried didn't work. And that's important for everybody to know. Sometimes it doesn't work, but you can always fix it. Now, my plan is to put the sentiment in that corner. So there's no texture in that corner at this point in time because that I was going to do some stamping with big with blocks right on the page, and I didn't want the texture underneath. So that was very deliberate on my part. But plans change. Now I'm adding some brown and I'm rubbing with the pad of my finger on top of the modeling paste that I put through the stencil. And that's bringing out the texture. I want to see that damask stenciling. And I'm highlighting it by putting some darks or lights or a combination thereof on that. Adding a little bit more brown, just now that I'm getting the whole picture. So giving this a dry, thinking about what I like. There's still some of that script that I stamped that I really just was jarring to me. It did not look good. I'm adding whites, I'm adding darks. And here's how the texture looks when it's done. Isn't that gorgeous? I just love how that brings up that modeling paste. Yum. So now that I'm basically happy with the background, I'm adding back some details. Some of the stems of the flowers, they didn't go to the end of the page because, of course, I was cutting it up and making it fit. So I'm adding that in. And I'm just using a combination of hooker's green and black and just adding those stems in, following what they have, and just making it my own. And then I'm also adding a little bit of paint at this time just to brighten up those colors. Remember, I want the poppy to be the focal image. So it needs to be brighter and stand out more than all the others. To that end, I'm taking the Prussian blue, which is a match for the blue of the poppy, and I'm doing some shading or putting a light wash on it, and I'm just brightening up those colors. But I'm not really adding paint at this time. It's more of a wash. And it really makes those poppies stand out from the background, which I wanted to do. And I'm just following what the original artist did. Where she has her darks, I'm adding more darks. And I'm adding a little Prussian blue. Sometimes I think I grabbed a little bit of black as well. And you can see the difference between the two that I did and this last one. I'm using an angle brush for the floating acrylic technique, this shading technique. And you've seen me doing this so many times. It's a wonderful technique. So you can see, hopefully, the difference. It's spectacular. But I wanted to add a little bit, put more bright in there. So I'm just getting in with some paint. Now this time, some of the white paint, or I'm not even sure if I'm using just plain white gesso here, I'm actually adding paint to it. So it's adding texture, and I want it to look very painterly, not precise. And I like the contrast between the floating and the flat of the blue. And now this has a little bit more texture. If you liked it better without that, that's a step you can skip. These are just ideas. And when you're creating, always, always, always do what looks good to you. So I've changed the composition, I've changed the colors slightly. Here I'm taking my woodless charcoal pencil. I love these. This is the soft one, and I'm just shading around the edges. I know my sentiments are going to be probably black. They usually are, and I just wanted to add that in and just kind of grunge the edges up a little bit and frame the page. Just FYI, I'm working on my 9 by 12 Canson Mixed Media Journal. I've taken the pages off the coil for this book. And then at the end, I will assemble it all. And I love the freedom that gives me because I'm working on a flat surface, just the single page. I'm not risking getting any of my other pages messed up. Here I'm adding some of the shading with the woodless charcoal pencil. The woodless charcoal pencil isn't permanent. So if I was adding wet medium after this, it would smear or wipe off. But I don't have a plan for doing that right now, so it's good. If this was on a canvas or a wood panel, I would spray it before I would apply a liquid varnish. So I would set it. Now in that corner, I wasn't going to put texture because I was going to do some stamping. And I've changed my mind. I'm just going to put my sentiments from my short and sweet sentiment pack. And so I got out the modeling paste and the stencil and added some stenciling there so it looks like the rest of the page. And now I'm coming back in with those same colors, the brown, the unbleached titanium, and the gesso, and repeating the process that I had. And again, here's how you go. You make a choice, and if later on you're changing your mind, you can. No worries. You can always edit your plan. I'm just adding the brown. I'm highlighting the texture, just like I did before. I'm using a makeup sponge. I'm using the pad of my finger. I'm adding white. I'm adding the brown. I'm going back and forth till I get the look that I like. But remember, as much as I want to bring out that texture and the pattern of that damask stencil, I want the poppies to be the focal image here. The poppies first, the top layer, the wheat stalks, the second layer, and then have the background being in the background. So it's not Naples yellow, it's a different yellow. And I'm splattering with that yellow. It's the yellow that's in the middle of the flowers. Yellow ochre, sorry, that's the name of it. But you could use whatever yellow you have, and then you might add a little bit of white to it. If it's a bright yellow, I want it more muted, but I'm matching it to what's in the middle of the poppies. And then I'm splattering with brown as well. And I'm just taking the regular Liquitex Basics paints, diluting it with water and splattering. And I couldn't find my fan brush to splatter with, so I'm just using a round brush here. Now I took that same yellow ochre and I painted it on some regular copy paper and I cut it up, and I'm mounting my white words on black background sentiments from my short and sweet pack on that yellow. I'm making that yellow a little bit more, it's in the middle of those flowers, and I'm balancing everything out here. And I love how that sets it off. And I just used 3 of the phrases, and that's the benefit of that short and sweet sentiment pack. They're single words, short phrases. Here I have live inspired, create magic. You just can pick, mix and match. You can pick what works well together to say what you want to say. And I can't remember what the last one is, and I don't have the page in front of me. Enjoy life. Loving how this all came together. It was a bit of a journey. And while it's a 25 minute video, this took me over 2 hours. Now I'm using the stylus and I'm taking that yellow ochre paint and I am adding texture to the middle. There's little dots there. So again, I'm building on what the original artist had, and I'm just adding to it and making it my own. But I want that little bit of texture instead of flat. And it helps make the focal image exactly that, focal. Thanks you so much for joining me. Give me a thumbs up, ask me a question, share this video with your creative friends. Come and follow me on Instagram at Creative Katie. Here are close-ups of the final page. I hope you love it as much as I do. Bye for now.